Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm Danny Smith, Executive Vice President and co-owner of Color ID, one of the world's leading integrators of advanced identity solutions. Welcome to Color ID's Campus Forum series, continuing the conversation. Today's session is titled ID Printer Report and is the fifth and the final session of the five-part third forum series. Everyone who's completed the five-session forum will receive a certificate of completion and a Color ID swag bag filled with some nice items. Color ID will confirm everyone's attendance, so you don't have to do anything regarding that. The sessions have also been recorded and they'll be available on demand soon. We'll be sending out email notifications when it's ready. At the beginning of today's session, there'll be a Menti poll to learn more about the common challenges you, the audience, are now experiencing. It's simple to do. You just open a browser on a PC or mobile and go to menti.com. Then you type in a 6-digit code on your screen. It's menti.com. We'll give you the code and we'll explain more during the presentation. Again, it's really nice we've been able to develop such meaningful relationships over the past 20 years, and we're incredibly grateful that we can come together and stay connected. Once again, we have a great group of identity industry attendees joining us today, so as we say, whoever you are and wherever you may be, we welcome you. And we hope that you find the investment of your time of great value and encourage you to be interactive in these sessions. Leading today's technical discussion will be David Stallsmith, Director of Product Management for Color ID. And David brings a wealth of technical information from over 14 years of working with advanced identity solutions. Of course, many of you know and have worked with David over the years as he works closely with manufacturers, vendors, and end users to promote understanding of the complicated products and services that comprise our identification industry. He's contributed to the decision-making process at many universities, healthcare facilities, and government agencies as they've considered acquiring contactless, smart card, mobile ID, and biometric systems. And since 2006, David has presented annually at the NACU conference and has also presented at NACUS's annual and leadership conferences, the European and the Canadian Campus Card Users Conferences, and full-day identity summits hosted by some of the most prominent universities in North America. Joining David on today's session as moderator is Mark Deegan, Color ID's corporate marketing manager. In addition to managing Color ID's marketing department for the past 16 years, Mark also juggles the duties of account representative for some of our most strategic partners, both customer and corporate. He's also the project manager for Color ID's banking-related customers. Now, Mark and David's technical knowledge concerning advanced identity solutions is a testament to their commitment to our industry and a great example of the value differential that Color ID employees bring to our customer and our corporate partner relationships. Now, just a few housekeeping items, we'll get this thing started. We're really encouraging these sessions to be interactive as possible, so please utilize the question box to submit questions, and all questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation during the Q&A. In addition to asking questions, you'll also see live polls throughout the presentation, and please be sure to participate in those and be as prompt as possible. Please note that Color ID's entire education team is listening in on today and is available for any questions or follow-up discussions. Just call or shoot your account manager an email. Thanks again for your privilege of your time and allowing us to come together and stay connected. I'm going to turn this over to Mark and David to get started. David?
Thanks, Danny. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar, the last in this series. We're going to talk about a number of things, but the goal here is to make this sort of like a walk around the showroom. We didn't get to have NACU with table after table full of printers and hardware, so we're going to do our best to bring that to you right here in this virtual showroom. We're going to talk about printer basics, Color ID opinions throughout, spoiler alert, and subject to change at any time. Also, encoder mysteries, which are always mysterious. And then at the end, what's coming that's new. Mark, let's go to our first Menti poll.
Outstanding. Thanks, David. So, everybody, if you could travel to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and plug in the code 265698. Hit submit. We're going to ask you a question. That question being, my ID printers are like what? So you can plug in a few responses. Be curious to see what everybody thinks here. Ready for an update, not compliant, mystery, adaptable, okay, unstoppable, Old. So a couple of people have said old. That's what you get there whenever you have a bolded word. Blue. Okay. Super old. So sounds like everybody has old hardware, possibly. Maybe ready for a tune-up. Hopers, working horse. Okay, sensitive. Very, very accurate there. So what we'll do, I think that's probably good for the number of folks that we have on here today. So thanks everybody for jumping in on that quickly. Dave, if you want to close us down, we'll jump into the presentation and I'll catch up with you guys on the first poll question.
Great, thanks Mark. Sorry about the screen hopping there. We'll get right down to card printing basics. So when you have an ID printer, you have either one of two types of printing methods. One is called direct to card and the other is called reverse transfer. So let's talk about direct to card first. This is a direct to card or DTC printhead from one of the printers right here and on the photo. And at the bottom of this printhead is a line of glass pixels, which are electronically activated heat spots in very fine, usually 300 dpi. You know, the area that they take up on that printhead, and the ribbon goes under the printhead, and then the card goes below the ribbon. And when the printhead heats at each one of those pixels in contact with the ribbon, it turns the die into a gas, which is then forced into the surface of the card. So it's called a sublimation process, and it's dye. So we usually call this dye sublimation, and it works for lots of different things. You can buy T-shirts with dye sublimation printing on them. Also, it's a very effective way of getting color digitally into another substrate. Versus reverse transfer printer, this is quicker and it's less expensive. So next we're going to talk about the reverse transfer printer, where it has now a thin film called retransfer film that usually is printed on using the same dye sublimation process. So now instead of the print head and then the ribbon and then the card, it's print head, ribbon, and retransfer film, and the image is printed in reverse on the back of the film, and then the film is applied to the surface of the card in a very secure way. These stay put, and it becomes one with the surface of the card. So you now have the thickness of that thin film over what was printed to help protect it. So it's now not only dye sub printing, which is sublimated into the surface of the plastic, but you now have the reverse transfer film over that to protect it a little bit. You also get better image quality because printing to these films works better than printing to cards in many cases. The film is much more predictable. Cards, PVC, it prints well, often very well, but it can be a little bit unpredictable. And it's also more secure because it is under that film. You can't just alter the surface of the card. And of course, it does take takes a little longer to print, and it costs a little bit more because now you're buying a film and a printer to handle this additional process. So a little longer, a little more expensive, definitely better quality printing. And then after you decide between those two, for your printer, you're going to add on probably a lamination unit, probably just one side, but some schools laminate on both sides. This applies a piece of plastic to over the surface, usually of what was printed, and it's usually 1 mil or 1/1000th of an inch thick. And so that's a pretty thick layer of plastic over what was printed, and it gives it both UV protection so it doesn't fade when exposed to the sun, and also very importantly, abrasion resistance, because especially university cards are still used a lot in mag stripe readers, and that really puts a lot of wear and tear on the surface of the card. You might also get a dual side module or flipper, because the printhead only prints on one side of the card and the printhead doesn't move. So you need to flip the card in order to print on the back. So the card goes through, and then if you're going to print it on the back, if the flipper flips it over, it's often a second module that's added onto the printer to handle that flipping. You very likely will have a mag stripe encoder, because most schools still use mag stripes quite a lot. And so again, the mag head is only in one place in the printer. So if you can orient your card so they go through and that mag head is in contact with the location of the mag stripe on the card, you're fine. But if you have two mag stripes on your card, now you have a problem, because there's only one mag head and it only catches one edge of the card. So you can either take the card out, run it back through, or as many schools do, if you are doing this, get a second printer and either do it in advance or do it afterwards to add that encoding to the second stripe. Or if it's possible, if you can provide the ISO numbers or whatever data would go on that second stripe to the card provider, they can, when they pre-print or whatever else they do with your cards, also add mag encoding. So there are several different options for handling a second stripe. And funny, you think years later, someday the second stripe is going away, and there are still schools adding second stripes to their cards. They got a new banking relationship, and here comes that second stripe. Also, you can put a smart card encoder in your printer for contact, which pretty much nobody's doing in anything outside of government, and then contactless, which a lot of schools are doing, because you either want to encode contactless data to the chip in the card, or you want to read pre-programmed data and catch it while it's in the printer. And then sometimes there's a card flattener, which is especially popular when you have a lamination unit. Some of those printers with the lam unit have a device that actually rebows the card, because putting lamination on one side of the card puts a lot of heat and pressure on just one side, which tends to cause it to curl a little bit. And then tactile impression is kind of a cool feature that DataCard came up with. You can have a die, either their standard design like the one shown, or you can have it made with your own logo. And then with heat and pressure, after your card is printed and all ready to come out of the printer, the last step is that it goes through the tactile impression module, and it physically stamps into the surface of the card that die image, which is kind of cool, and you can feel it, so it's tactile. Let's talk for a moment about laminate, over lamination, lam, whatever you call it. It is that film that's applied after the card is printed. It's thicker than reverse transfer film. We often have the question as people are looking at reverse transfer film printers, they say, well, do we need lamination? Because now we have that retransfer film on there. And the answer is, you could get by without it, but retransfer film is very thin. And with the kind of wear and tear that university cards go through, it would probably make sense to put lamination on there to get an extra year or two out of your cards. There are two ways now of handling that over lamination. And one is the traditional way, which is where the lam is a patch the size of a card on a liner, which is just a long ribbon of clear plastic. And as each card goes through, the lamination is peeled off of that liner and applied to the card. But there's a newer method. It's not brand new, but it is newer than that method, and it's called linerless or wasteless. And in this case, there is no film that holds the patches together. The sheet of lamination material is all there is. And as each card goes through, a piece of that sheet is applied to the surface of the card, it's cut off, and then that's it. There's no film to roll up. And then the next card comes through, and the next piece of that lam film is applied to the card. Either way, like I said before, these provide security and protection, and also a very popular feature with over lamination film is that you can put custom holograms in there. And these can be very elaborate. You can have a lot of different types, but the most common thing is just to put, if you want something custom, put your school logo, crest, shield, whatever, in the over lamination material itself as a hologram. And the creation of the die for making these holographic images in overlam film is very time intensive. It takes hours and hours of laser cutting to create the die that will then be used to imprint your holographic image into each piece of film that's going to go on a card. So that explains why it's very expensive to have the die. There's a die origination fee. They have to actually make your die out of whatever the metal is that they cut, so that it's going to now be used for thousands and thousands of lamination images in holographic look. So those are, they're a little expensive to get started. After that, it's not that big a deal on a per ribbon basis. And there are also other things you can add. You can add UV inks, you can add nano text, hidden text, as much crazy security stuff as you want. The driver's license agencies used to wear these things out, but either way, there are a lot of options for what you can do with lamination film. Okay, before we dive into the printers themselves, let's do a two-part poll. Mark?
All right, guys. So we've got a two-part poll. Please select what ID printer do you use today? This is part one. So if you don't see your printer model on this one, we'll get it on the next side. So let's see what everybody is using today. All right. Okay, I'll do this first one. So part one, 50% of you using some form of an HID reverse transfer printer. So that'd be the 5000 or 5600. 33% are utilizing a data card direct card printer. So that's their 75, the 460, 360. And then 17% are utilizing an HID direct card printer. So let's done with part one. I'm going to turn on part two here. So for those that wasn't applicable to on part one, let's see if anybody is utilizing these printer models. And Dave, I think this is going to be an easy one.
Okay.
Everyone is using part one printers. So we're pretty much a Fargo data card shop today.
All right, interesting. Yeah,
All
no others among us today.
There you
All
go.
right, what's good for data card? So let's talk about data card first. And there was a famous quotation made back in the 1950s by the president of GM, who said to Dwight Eisenhower or the Congress or so, I think it was before Congress, and he said, "What's good for let's see, so as goes GM, so goes the United States." Well, we've come a long way since then in a lot of different ways, but in higher ed, we could just about say that for data card, because for making ID cards in higher education in North America, data card has just been the printer for a long time. They got in early and got in with a lot of different companies that offered printers and got their support and their integration, and they became the printer for higher ed for decades. And and they're still at it. They're still doing a good job. The SD-460 is still widely used by schools and doing a good job. The CD line is pretty much the same printer, only black and gray. And I've heard the data card did just a little electronic tweak to increase its output by a couple cards an hour so that it would be the premier printer in the line. But other than that, it's exactly the same printer, except for the ribbons are locked to certain dealers. So SD has been, I think, the most popular, and it is a direct-to-card printer. That big part on the bottom there is a laminating unit, which you all know. It's a SD-360 essentially bolted on top, although you have to order it all together. But it's been a very successful printer. And talking about the direct-to-card successor to the SD line, DataCard has been talking about that for a couple of years. We haven't seen anything yet, but we're told there's something coming soon. In the meantime, the successor looked like it would be this printer, the CR805 with lamination. And it has many good things about it. It prints with a pigment ink rather than dye sublimation. So as these two images, diagrams show here from the data card site. On the right, it shows the dye sublimation dye going into the surface of the card. But on the left, it shows the pigment ink actually sitting on top, just like a standard printing process you would use on paper, magazine pages, or whatever. So, if you see a printer that's running well and doing a good job, it does a very good job. The CR805 does have the capacity to print very well, and it is reverse transfer. Now, one thing I didn't mention yet, but I will bring it up again in this talk, is that many manufacturers have tackled the introduction of reverse transfer printers into the market, and it always takes a few years for the thing to become actually useful. It's a very challenging project, evidently, to build a reverse transfer printer from the ground up. And we've watched every company that's introduced them go through this, and the CR805 has been one of those. So this is the one printer that was conspicuously left out of the last two polls. Mark, you want to take care of this poll?
Absolutely. So, launching it now. Does anybody have any personal experience with the CR805? All right. Flip it around here. 60% say no experience with it, and a whopping 40% says that they sent them back. There you go, Dave. That sounds kind of consistent.
Yes, it's certainly consistent with our experience at Color ID. I don't want to slam DataCard. They've been such a strong producer for our markets and our customers, and done such a good job over the years. But this printer has just been a rocky start with them, and so I thought let's just let the people on the line tell the story first. And we at Color ID have seen this with a number of our customers. They ordered the 805s in the last couple of years, and a number of them have sent them back. Others have. I talked to a school just last week, and data card technicians came to their school and spent 2 days there. They have 3 printers, 2 whole days replacing belts, going over those things top to bottom. I don't know what else they might have replaced or tweaked or adjusted. They said they're much better since then, so that's all encouraging. But here is what one of our customers wrote to us just a couple months ago. They have the CR805 and they use them, and they bought them and they're committed to them, and they're kind of they make things work. They're that kind of people that put up with stuff and make them get along rather than just saying, get that out of my house. And so, but here's what they have to do: run sticky card, clears K2 every time, run sticky and alcohol at every ribbon change, fan the cards before putting them in the hopper, and never fill up the whole hopper, just about a third of the way at most, because weight matters for some reason. And when filling the hopper, tuck the card at the very bottom gently until it is flush and it grabs. If you don't, that card and all the rest will jam. So kind of touchy stuff, just getting the cards in there and keeping the thing clean. So, if you spend a lot of time and care with your pet, then maybe this is the printer for you. But if you have a lot of different people in and out of your card office, you might want to wait for that thing to just hit the reliability numbers a little better. But anyway, moving right along. So Entrust Data Card, because Data Card was bought a few years ago by Entrust, a digital security identification company, which I think has affected their direction somewhat. But anyway, they have introduced some pretty interesting approaches. They have a single wire now versus a dual wire. So the dual wire connection to the printer, one was the network connection, or USB just to print to the cards. And then if you had an encoder, a contactless encoder, not magstripe, but contactless or some other kind of encoder in the printer or reader, then you had to have a second wire for that. That's been the traditional approach. So got an encoder, you have a second USB wire. DataCard has put them both now into that single Ethernet wire, which carries printer and the encoder data. And TrueCredential, the new software from Entrust DataCard, supports that pretty well. So again, some of the schools that have jumped into True Credential and CR 805 have had trouble with that. And we're not quite sure if it's the software or the printer or both or the networks or what, but there evidently are more things there to break than when you just have a USB wire from a PC to a printer. I think ultimately this is going to get fixed, and it's probably going to become the way of the future because everybody wants their hardware to be on networks. It's just getting it there and getting it to work right all the time is still a bit of a challenge. It's very important to get the encoder part number right for your printer and your software. So if you have a certain kind of contactless card and you want to read it in the printer and you're using a certain kind of software and you're using it especially if you're using it in an integrated solution, you need to ask the integrator if it's integrated like Seaboard or Transact or whomever, what encoder do I get in this printer? And it's got to be by model number and part number. It has to be correct because when they write that software to support the encoder, it's written specifically to an encoder. You need to get that right. And then Transact schools, they've actually worked with one of the encoder companies to build a model for them. And they put their own chip in there to put their encryption key into the data that is being written to the card in the printer. So it gets pretty granular when some of these integrations are worked out, and you just need to make sure you get your hardware right. You can't just order a printer and say, oh, we have DeskFire cards, and then just say, oh, put a DeskFire encoder in there. More than likely, you're going to have hardware that doesn't work. So be very specific and do testing before you get too far into that. So the last thing about Entrust Data Card is I mentioned that Entrust bought Data Card and they do digital security products, and a lot of it has to do with banking and authenticating people to their accounts and verifying that they're the right person when they log into their accounts and securing the connections between accounts. And then also because they have those banking partners, they provide very large printing machines like this one shown here, which all the blue units over there on the right side of the picture, those are actually the printer and encoding pieces, and all the rest of the stuff is about putting cards on paper cards that'll go into envelopes and get mailed out as credit cards, and that thing will crank out 1 million cards in not very much time from the basement of a very large financial institution. So Entrust Data Card has very specific solutions for very large financial institutions. So they have their eyes right now, I think, set on a very different and much larger market than their desktop printers. And I think that's maybe part of why the resources don't seem to be allocated to supporting some of the new product introductions. But we're seeing a little bit of movement there, like somebody leaned over and said, hey, we got to keep that line going. And so that's a good thing, and we're looking forward to that. But definitely they have an orientation towards the large markets for sure. HID Fargo. Fargo was started in the 1990s. They made dye sublimation printers, and then they figured out they should start printing cards. And then HID bought them in the 2000s, and they've had a very serious focus on desktop ID printing for a long time, and it hasn't let up. We're impressed with what they do. Their support is good. Their printers are quite solid, and they have quite a range of printers available. The stalwart of the line, the DTC 4500 here, has been out for well over 10 years. Schools like it. It has a small footprint. The laminator sits on top, and the cards are all handled with, in a fairly small amount of real estate, and you can get those hoppers either one on each end or both on one end, as you see here, so that you depends on how you want to orient that in your office. You can turn it sideways or 90 degrees to sideways, whichever way you interpret sideways, and take up as little space as possible and get your cards printing. It's pretty quick, it's pretty quiet, and it has been updated a lot since 2013. The DTC 1500 was introduced a lot more recently, and it looks quite familiar. primarily in this picture because the laminator is the same. It sits on top, same thing. The 1500 essentially the same chassis as the 4500, just a little simpler printer, not quite as many features, and it is a little less expensive. So if you are looking and you need to save a little money, maybe something to do second mag stripes with, or whatever, the 1500 is here as a familiar alternative to the 4500 if you want to go that way. A few years ago, HID engineers were sitting around, and I joked that they must have had headbands and tie-dye shirts on that day, and they were thinking back a number of years to the DTC 550 or 500 series, which is shown in the bubble there, which was a metal chassis printer. And I know at Color ID, and I'm sure at other shops too, the techs still go, man, we missed that 550. That was a great little printer. And you could buy a lam unit for it. It cranked all day. It was solid. Everybody loved that printer, and they ran for a long, long time. Well, HID, thinking about back in that way, said, you know, let's make something like that for the 2020s. And so they came up with the DTC 5500 LMX. So it's a direct-to-card printer, and the LMX indicates the type of laminator. But what sets this printer apart from a lot of the other ones we're talking about today is that it is all in one chassis. You have the possibility of 2 lam units, and the flipper are all in this one printer. There's not a bolt-on piece here. You can pick that thing up just like it is, and it's all in one piece. It has the linerless lam that we talked about earlier. So that's a forward-looking lamination process there, and it gives it a little greener approach to the whole thing because there's no liner left over to throw away, just the spool itself that it came on. So wasteless lam. It also has ion technology for lamination, which heats up much, much faster. One of the knocks on lamination has been that it takes them a little while, like several minutes, to get hot enough to actually laminate. Printing, direct-to-card printing happens fast. Reverse transfer printer takes some warm up. Lamination takes longer to warm up. And so if somebody comes in for a card now and then, you're waiting 3 or 4 minutes just for the machine to warm up before it actually prints the card. So with ion technology, cut that way down, and the card is coming through much more quickly. So this thing has a lot going on. A lot of people are very happy with it. Some people found it a little frustrating because of some of the ways that it behaves. It's a kind of a clever idea, a little bit of a throwback, and some forward-looking ideas too. The HDP 5000 or 5600, that's why the X, and then a little dyslexic there in the first line of the bullets, HDP should be 5000. It's still a very solid printer. It's still very much alive. This thing was introduced over a dozen years ago. And again, it took, like I said about reverse transfer printers, it took HID a couple years to get this thing right. It had problems. It was overheated. Cards were warping. But I think they're on their 8th iteration now, and they just keep getting better and better. What you're looking at right here on the right is the printer, in the middle is the flipper, and on the left is the lamination module. Now this is a standard lamination. It can lam both sides, but it's a regular lam with a liner, not the linerless lam. The reason HDP 5600 is crossed out here is because it was introduced as the 600 DPI successor to the 5000. Everything the same, essentially, but a 600 DPI print head. And then that was superseded by the next printer we're going to talk about, the 6600. So the 5600 has been declared end of life. It's still supported. It still works very well. But it is, if you're buying a new printer, you want the very latest thing from HID, then you want to go here to the HDP 6600. It was just introduced in late 2019. Yeah, a lot of really cool things here. It has the ion technology, so it's heating up fast, both for retransfer and for lamination, and it will print and apply the retransfer film simultaneously to 2 cards, which is a big deal because it's moving the cards more rapidly through that retransfer through the printer process, up to 230 cards per hour, printing full color one side with transfer film. So that's into and beyond directed card printing speed. So this thing is moving very quickly, and it's because it's not waiting for the card to receive the retransfer film before the next card comes through. That's all happening simultaneously. Has the same wasteless lamination as the DTC 5500. Has excellent image quality, 600 DPI, and it looks great. So a lot of good things going on with this printer. And it is a new printer, but they seem to be very solid right from the get-go. So we're excited about this printer. Our techs are very happy with what they're seeing there so far. Now, we talked about encoders with data card because they have the single wire thing going on. Over at HID, it gets especially complicated because HID supports all the HID contactless chips and the way they're encoding. So this list right here is just a crazy list of all the different types of chips and the way they're supported. So if you order your printer with the OmniKey 5127 CK Mini, which is called the encoder in the 6600, then it does not read and write any, let's see, it has support to, yeah, it can read. So it can read all the HID cards. Okay, let's see what happens next. And it can write, but it does not write to a lot of these cards, the HID data. We're here in this area of the graph, it's HID access control data. And the point here is not so much for you to remember all this, like, ooh, is the printer we want going to do that, as to just point out this is pretty complicated stuff. And so if you want to read and write to a third-party application area beyond the software that HID provides for reading and writing their own, this CK Mini is the encoder to do that. Moving ahead, the encoder, as opposed to the or programmer. Yeah, see, this is how confusing they do at HID. On the left, they call it an HID iClass SE encoder, but the description is it's a programmer. So it gets a little confusing. And again, that's the point. So if you're trying to write to MyFairDesFire cards a custom application, then the programmer will do that, but not HID applications. If you want to write HID app, oh, there it is. Okay. What is the MyFairDesFire SIO? Okay, so it won't write custom data. So you get the point here. It's pretty complicated. So if you're trying to read or write with the newer HID printers and the encoders and programmers, make sure that you sit down with somebody who has experience with this and get it straightened out, because again, don't just say, oh, we have this kind of card and we have this kind of printer, we just order this thing, because it may not work. You have to get it right. And that's the point of that chart. Zebra, let's move on to the animal kingdom here. They bought Eltron, and Eltron had such a successful printer back around the turn of the millennium that if you go to the UK even today, you'll find people calling ID printers Eltrons. It just was a name, and then Zebra bought them and they did pretty well, and then they kind of floundered, but they've stayed up with it, and over the years they have several really interesting products right now. So right now they have essentially 3 lines. The ZXP7 is direct to card, ZXP9 is reverse transfer, and then ZC is their newest line of printers. This printer, the DTC printing ZXP7, is in some ways quite comparable to the DTC 5500 LMX that we just talked about from the HID world. It's fast, it has large hoppers, it is quite reliable, and it also has the wasteless lamination. So pretty good printer there for cranking out a lot of cards. If you want to do reverse transfer in the ZXP world or in the Zebra world, the 9 is a very capable printer. It is fast because primarily because it prints the card in landscape mode, whereas most printers the card path is the long edge of the card. This one goes through with the short edge of the card and prints a wider print head across a narrower card. So it saves time there, and It has the wasteless lamb. Also, the challenge with Zebra is they are not as well supported for reading and writing contactless card data. It could be done, it just hasn't been done as much. Again, because the software companies have to directly support the encoder and the printer to make that happen, and it just hasn't happened that much yet. If you're looking for a smaller, quick, very competent printer that's quite new, that's the ZC350 from Zebra. You know, in the remote card office part of the program, I said if you're printing at home and you're trying to get your cards, you know, you just need something in a corner of your house to print cards, this might be something you might pick up just to crank them out. It does very well. Small footprint, no lamb, has a Wi-Fi option, and they just don't require much maintenance. They work well. Another thing Zebra does is they have all these cool ribbons that some of the other manufacturers do not have. Half panel full color one side, half panel both sides, pearlescent, which is kind of neat. It gives that shimmery quality to the ink, silver underneath. Dye sub black is something I don't know any other manufacturer makes that. Not resin black, but dye sub black, and then all the monochrome ribbons that are available. So let's talk just a little bit more about reading and encoding after this poll.
Thanks, Dave. So everybody, do you read or encode contactless cards in your printers? Thank you, everybody. 83% say yes, you read or encode, and then 17% said no. That is a solid number right there. Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, that's a very high number for inline communication with chips. That's pretty cool. So a lot of this then won't be news to anybody because you've already been through this. You've figured out what works for your school. But just in case you were looking around what else is out there or what are other people doing, the three software products that are best right now for the university market, reading and encoding: Card Exchange, True Credential, and Assure ID. Again, the software has to directly support the hardware because Windows is not involved in this chip communication. Also, software developers for these software companies, ID software companies, are limited. They don't have a lot of extra time for custom work, and so they develop to the most requested printers. You know, they put their effort where they think they'll get the most return on their expenditure of resource. So sometimes they'll do a custom job for you, but more than likely it's, you know, you just have to find out what does this software support. And then a workaround is often, as many of you know, the RFIDs reader, because it has keystroking. So it has worked well for IDWorks. If we found years ago that if somebody had a weird card and there was no way to read it and they wanted to read it in line, if we put an RFIDs reader in the printer, more than likely that would keystroke into IDWorks and we could make it work. So that is becoming harder to do with the newer products, but it has been a solution. Inline encoders for these printers, OmniKey is the one HID uses. DataCard offers OmniKey. Dual Eye is the DataCard printer that offers the single wire support. Idena, Velatech, and RFIDs, and there are others, but these are the leading names in the encoders that go into printers. And of course, they're not usually finished, they're boards. They go stuffed in there, and Transact has their turnkey solution. As I mentioned, you order, they install it, and you bring it to your campus and plug and play pretty much. They use True Credential, DataCard printers, and their own provisioned encoder. Seaboard has integrations with both True Credential and Fargo Connect. They have in the past preferred to capture card serial number and then use that to look up the pre-programmed data in the database. Atrium often is using card exchange for any kind of chip communication in the printer. And they also support card serial number and lookup like Seaboard has. And TouchNet, who is doing a session right now on the webinar somewhere in the world on their mobile, on what they're doing, they're explaining call for details. So if you know anybody that listens to TouchNet and you're interested in what they're doing, maybe you can get a copy of that. So funny story, just briefly, how different parts of the world look at these different processes that we take for granted. A manufacturer contacted us from Asia, and they said, we have these printers, they're reverse transfer, take a look at them. And we looked, and they look good, and would we represent them? And we got to one point, I said, well, these don't have mag encoders. They said, oh, we consider that a legacy technology. And we don't. Really, you need mag encoders? And it was, yes, in North America, we need mag encoders. And I think I had to think about it for a little while, and I thought, in Asia, there weren't probably as many cards printed at the desktop with mag stripes as we have done here in North America. And so they had a simpler infrastructure for a long time, and then all of a sudden they had phones, and they use phones in lots of places that we're only just beginning to use phones. So they leapfrogged that mag stripe step, that 20-year step there, and went to mobile. We're still using a lot of mag stripes trying to get to mobile. So our infrastructure is set and working, but in a way, it's slowing us down from moving to the next step. I just thought that kind of caught me off guard. Oh, that's legacy. Who wants that? And well, like everybody here. So the other printers that nobody really has, JVC makes these direct reverse transfer printers, and they are rebranded by lots of companies and sold around the world. And Niska just bought this line from bought JVC and these printers. So now these are Niska printers, and on the left is DataCard brand, in the middle is a MAGICARD brand Prima, and on the right is the Niska version. All the same printer, just different labels on them. Canon, who obviously has dominated paper printing, has gotten into ID card printing, and they also have a reverse transfer printer that Evolus puts their name on there. So some stuff going on there, and you can get it with LAMP. Don't know a lot about those. They're pretty new. And then a company called IDP introduced their Smart 70, a modular kind of cool looking printer there with very tall towers. If you like to stack cards up high, that might be your printer. Just letting you know what's out there. MAGICARD, their latest reverse transfer printer called the Ultima. They introduced the Matrix a few years ago. Their first foray into their own reverse transfer printer, and sure enough, 2 years later, it was pulled off the market, redesigned, and reintroduced as the Ultima. So again, another confirmation that it's just hard to make a reverse transfer printer. So if you are trying to print something bigger than a CR80 card, the standard ID card size, there are a couple options for you. Zebra makes the ZC10L large, and it will print up to 5.5 by 3.5 inches, the size of this credential, which if you're ever at a sporting event, they look great hanging around people's necks compared to CR80 cards, which are kind of small for that sort of application. And so Zebra made a direct-to-card printer for this large format, prints one size, and it cranks pretty good, almost 200 cards per hour in color. So it's durable. You can put it in a bag and drag it around and print those big credentials. Niska has this is a very large printer. We saw this, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. They brought it to us and demonstrated it, and it is blindingly fast. That is the most impressive thing about this. It prints really big cards, any kind of size. The only thing is it uses an inkjet. It does not use the other typical ID card processes. So it's spraying ink on this card at like 1 a second. It's awesome to watch. The cards have to be treated with a special coating so that the ink sticks to the surface of the card, because the inkjet ink is it's just the way it works for them. But it is a very particular printer. It doesn't like to be moved, and it doesn't like certain kinds of design. So if you have high saturation, large areas with a certain color, it can have trouble. So there's still some things to be worked out with this, but when they get them worked out, it is pretty impressive. If you're ever at a trade show and you see NISCA booth, go by and see if they have the Swift color there. Because after watching cards go through the printer at, I don't know, every 20 seconds or so, watch this thing spit them out. It's pretty quick. It's amazing. All right, so let's do a recap. What did we learn here today? Well, Entrust Data Card and their desktop line, it just feels like their focus is drifting a little bit. Nobody said that. It's just a Color ID opinion, maybe just a David Stallsmith opinion, but it is. And they seem to be trying to regain a little trust there by putting some people out in the field and setting things right. So we'll see how that goes over the next year or two. HID Fargo, very focused and developing new printers and good people working on their printers. So when we call HID, we get support. If we get support, you get support. So that's a very strong brand right there in the printing world. Zebra, also making very good printers right now. They got some new blood when they acquired Motorola Electronics, and not the phone company, but the two-way communication company and some other stuff going on there. So they're a big company and they keep growing and doing well. NISCA, they purchased JVC. We'll see where that goes. Evolus has an international focus, trying to build their market in North America. They do kind of aim for the low-end printer business, a lot on internet sales and stuff, but generally a solid brand. And then MAGICARD has been pretty quiet in North America lately. They introduced the reverse transfer printer, but they don't seem to be spending a lot of resources on marketing and support at this point. And of course, a final warning on encoding. If you are encoding a mag stripe that's always supported by Windows, it's not a problem. If you are doing anything else with a contactless chip with a reader encoder inline, then you have to pay attention and get confirmation from the software developer or the integration partner on the correct reader to put in your printer. As far as what's coming, ID card printing. It's a plastic card. It's a machine that puts printing on a plastic card. We're seeing incremental improvements, and I think we will continue to see those. We got the linerless lamb. We have the pigment ink data card introduced, the fast heat up of the ion technology by the HID printers. So incremental. Essentially, the printers do the same functions, they just do them better and faster. So we expect that to continue. Reverse transfer is becoming more widely offered. Just about every company has their own reverse transfer printer right now, but it won't ever completely replace direct to card. It costs more. It takes a little longer in general. And so we think we'll always have the two styles. Laser units may become affordable. A few years ago, some companies were trying to push the laser units, but when they couldn't get them below $50,000, they just really didn't take off. And then encoding support will continue to improve. I think a lot of that's on the software side because the hardware's been there for a long time. And then the final thing is, in the future, if anybody else figures out this inkjet thing, the Swift Color is very impressive. And obviously there's a process there that does a really good job. Maybe better inks, maybe other, I don't know what all is involved there, but there's somebody doing printing cards in a very different way with impressive results, but not quite there yet. So anyway, that is all I have to say about printers.
Thanks, Dave. Looks like I got a couple of questions here queued up. So let me just get to this first one. Okay. So first one regarding your portion of reading and encoding in the desktop printer. Does Color ID offer any support in setting up a custom encoding program for our existing printers and contactless cards?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard. It can be hard. It depends. It depends on what you're trying to do. But Color ID has worked with a lot of schools in setting up custom encoding. whether it's Desfire, CIOS, MyFair, any of the different types of chips. Obviously, it's going to help to align the software and the hardware so that it all works. And then after that, you have to figure out what's the profile, what's the data that actually is going to go onto the card, and how's that going to be handled, and then what readers will read that data. And so we have to test. We have to get the hardware and software aligned. We have to create the profile. We have to make sure that the readers, all the different types of readers are going to read that card, also can find the data from the profile as it comes off the card. So there is quite a bit of energy and testing involved there, but yeah, we've done that for a lot of schools.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see here. We recently upgraded to a HTP printer, and our cards have a significant bow to them. Why is this happening?
Well, it could be a heat setting in the reverse transfer part of the printer, because these heat settings are variable, or it could be the lamination unit. If you're only laminating one side, and I guess there are a couple different ways to test it. Is it happening if you don't laminate, or does it only happen if you do laminate? Try to figure out where, which unit is causing this, and then whatever it is, you need to probably first of all get the temperature set right, dwell settings and other things. Color ID technicians are experts at this. They spend all day on the phone helping people get things like this straightened out, and a lot of it is trial and error, but our folks can guide you through that. Contact us and we'll be happy to help you with that.
And I think one other thing to keep in mind is that I do believe we always suggest, when you're using that HTP printer process, to make sure you're using a different type of formulation of cardstock called composite that usually has a blend of PVC and some sort of composite material like a Melanex or something too, right?
Oh, absolutely, Mark. Absolutely.
Alrighty.
I missed the most important part of the answer. Yes, if you're using reverse transfer, we would highly recommend using composite cards.
Definitely. Okay, this if I have a custom holographic laminate with my old ID printer and want to upgrade to the new HTP 6600, will I have to pay for the origination fee again?
In that case, it's called a recombination fee usually, and you will have to pay some fee because the material will be different, and the die may or may not translate directly from the old lamination that you were buying to what you need to buy for the 6600. So I believe there may be a reduced price. We have to look at that. If it's possible, we'd help you with that. I don't know exactly if 66 is starting from scratch for the 6600, or if there's a reduced origination fee for recombination.
Definitely. Okay, so that was it for the attendees' questions. I've got one question for you, Dave, that I'll see if I can stump you on. So out of all of these different printer security features that you've talked about, which ones are you most likely to suggest for those who are wanting to leap off, make their card more visually secure? I know there's a lot of different options out there, but what do you try to help people, towards?
Well, and that's a really good question, because a lot of people are, a lot of the security of the card is in the contactless chip, and if it's encrypted data, then that's handling it through the transactions, and that can't be replicated. But anytime you're using a card for something else, a mag stripe, or just, hey, let me see your card, make sure that you're carrying the card that looks like you. People forget, we get into the electronic side of things about how important it is to make it hard to clone cards electronically. We forget that the plastic itself actually could benefit from security features. So I think probably a holographic over laminate. I mean, most schools use over laminate anyway, and if you put a hologram in there with your logo, something unique to you, it does cost that first time through. After that, the price is only a little bit more than it would be for clear. And at that point, not only it gives you a really cool looking card, because now you got that holographic image in the laminate, but it makes that really hard to replicate. You know, it's like physical security. You can put any kind of fancy lock on the door, but if somebody can pry that door open with a great big pry bar or break a window and crawl in, they've worked around it. So you can't stop everything, but you want to at least raise the bar. And as long as you're using your cards for anything visual, then it helps to raise the bar a little bit, because if all you have is a photo and a name and a number and nothing unique to your institution, then anybody can print that using a $500 printer they bought on the internet and get close, especially if they put some wear on it. So I think holographic over laminate is probably a good way to go there to add some visual security.
Absolutely. And one thing I like to tell people is, you know, no matter what type of security feature you add onto your card, you know, you can have some really cool stuff on there, like the nanotext and UV, all that stuff. But if everybody on your campus isn't in the know as far as staff and faculty, as far as what they're keying in on when they look at your card, if they don't know to look for microtext or a UV, you know, a logo, you know, placed under a black light, then you're kind of defeating the purpose there. You need to make sure that everybody on your organization is all on the same page when it comes to those types of security features, so that you're actually using them, and you know, everyone knows what to look for.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go. Okay, Dave. So that was it. So great questions, everyone. Thank you all for participating and being prompt on the live polls. So today marks the 5th and final webinar of the Campus Forum series, and in the coming days, we're going to supply you with a landing page where all the past presentations can be viewed. With that being said, on behalf of Danny, David, and myself, thank you all for continuing the conversation with Color ID's Campus Forum series. Good night, everyone.